Okay, good morning, everyone. We're a little bit behind in the Thursday night class. Last week I gave a Thursday night class, but I was hoping that Friday last week I would be able to continue it because it's a long discourse. And actually we started this the week earlier on Friday morning, or Friday afternoon rather, Erev Shabbos. And then I continued last week Thursday night, and this is part 3 of the Biur v'zois Chukas HaTorah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol b'dvarei. So I'd like to continue it now, and probably for about an hour and a half. We're not going to finish. Let's move. Hopefully maybe tomorrow morning, or if we need to, we'll leave this for the Thursday night class to rest, but I'd rather not. And do something on Parshas Pinchas. So here we are, holding on page 116. I do want to dedicate this year. Someone sent us a donation, not for anything special, but but I'm not sure. He marked the anonymous box. I'm not going to say his name. So I don't know if sometimes people do that accidentally. It could be it's not. But in any case, if you gave a donation in the last 24 hours for $322, that was what I saw. So I would like to dedicate this class to you and your family. Again, he didn't write for what, where, and when, so should be a bracha for him. Okay. So here we are. We're holding V'ata yesh lahavin. Okay, now I'm going to do a brief review. Again, these classes are 2 recent classes. They're called the Biur Zois Chukas HaTorah. It's a Maimer in Likkutei Torah. So the main idea that we learned till now, at least as it connects to the part we're learning now, was that Para Aduma is the reason why it's called Zois Chukas HaTorah, which means it reaches and touches the essence of the Torah, where the Torah is etched in God. Remember, we discussed that there's letters that are written and there are letters that are etched. The origins of Torah, as they are rooted in the very, very quintessence of Hashem, that's where the Torah is like engraved letters, where the source and the letters are one. So the Torah obviously is already specified ideas. And the question is, how much are these ideas, or how much are these ideas an expression, a revelation of the essence that is beyond all ideas and beyond all definitions. So there is a level where the Torah is emerging as engraved letters. And an engraved letter is one with the object in which they're engraved on. In our case, the entity in which it is engraved on is Hashem himself. The letters are an expression of him. And then once the letters move more outward and they become more conceivable ideas, even in the realm of the divine, they become more in ideas of intelligence and so on and so forth. That's already considered written letters, where that state of intelligence cannot be considered the quintessential being. It's enclosed. It's just like in letters, even in written letters. Underneath the letters, there is the parchment, and the parchment facilitates the letters. So in our case, the parchment would be considered God, enclosed in the ideas of Torah, but the idea and him are not totally one, just like the letter is foreign ink that's put on the parchment, as opposed to the engraved letter, where the engravement is in the entity itself that represents an infinitely higher state of Torah. Obviously, at that state, it is utterly inconceivable and unknowable, and we find that that's the way the Torah was originally given, is that to show us and demonstrate how deep the Torah is rooted in Hashem. We find that the Torah is in its original form was engraved on the luchos. Okay, we're going to see actually when we learn further in the Maimer, not in today's part, that the idea of engraved letters is even deeper than the engraved letters of the luchos. The letters engraved in the luchos are already considered second stage and compared to something even before the luchos. And when we're saying Zos Chukas HaTorah, we're getting to the engraved letters of the Torah, we mean even preliminary, even before the luchos. And what's the point of Zos Chukas HaTorah? Is that when the time the Torah gets to us, the Torah goes through many, many levels of descent, and in a sense, when it descends, it kind of moves away from that higher, deeper. It leaves. It becomes more external, and we're engaging in it in its external states. But yet, here's the secret: through our study of Torah and our observance of mitzvahs the way we should, we're able to reconnect the Torah, even the Torah as we connect to it, as we have it, to its origins of origins in the very essence of God. And that's the idea of, he discussed how there's two names of Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, two levels, Yud Kei Vav Kei external, Yud Kei Vav Kei as it is one with God. That's why in this pasuk it says two times Hashem's name, the Tetragrammaton twice, Vaydaber Havaya al Moshe Lemor. So Ashetziva Havaya, the higher Havaya is Havaya as it is etched in Hashem himself, that he is commanding Lemor to connect that to Chachma. That's when we're learning the Torah as Chachma, as God's wisdom, we should not be missing out on the essence. But that's dependent on us. And how is it dependent on us? On our observance of mitzvahs, which expresses itself primarily in the red heifer. Parah Aduma is the one mitzvah that demonstrates, it's the prototype of all mitzvahs. It would be an example. In other words, if you're a salesman and you want to sell your company, you want to bring one object, one of your one of the I don't know, what would you call it? One of the material or whatever it is that your company is producing that will be most reflective of everything you're producing. Or a teacher wants to teach one teaching that you'll get a real sense of who this teacher and what their teachings are all about. That's a demonstration, a demo. That's the point, a demo. Parah Aduma is a demo of all of Torah and mitzvahs. The reason is because all of Torah and mitzvahs is about lifting up the world to God and drawing God down to the world, and that is reflected in the red heifer in Parah Aduma, because in Parah Aduma we do a ratzo, a powerful ratzo, by burning the animal into ashes. And as we learned in the last class, that even though in every mitzvah, and so many mitzvahs, there's an element of taking something and elevating it to Hashem, like in a korban or the like, definitely sacrifices. And here it's also burning something into the ashes. But the point over here is that in our case, there is every element of existence that is part of the Parah Aduma, part of that elevation. Lifting things up from the something to the nothingness, returning things back into God, returning the creation, the energy of creation back into its source. That's called Ratzai, escaping the trappings of finite existence back into the infinite. And that procedure of Yitzias Mitzrayim, going up high, is most expressed by Parah Aduma because it has within it the elevation of all four species of the world: the inanimate, the plant, the animal, and the human. So where did we see we have all those things, and they're all being burnt up in the fire, which fire means the extinguishing it into non-existence, into pre-existence. So where do you have it in the fire? All elements. So we explained that you have the red heifer itself is an animal. When it becomes ash, it is inanimate. So you have both. Then you put into it two types of plants: a cedar tree, a branch of a cedar tree, and a little grass. So that's the tzomeach, that's the vegetation that's being elevated. And again, when it burns to ashes, it too is the inanimate. And then you have the final one is the red, the ribbon, the piece of, I guess it was made out of wool, thread with a ribbon that was dyed with the dye of this tolas, of this type of worm, which gives some kind of a crimson dye. And that represents the human. Why does it represent the human? Because the sages say that the power of this type of worm, of this tolas, is that it burrows through trees with its mouth. It's a small, tiny, tiny little creature, yet it has so much power that it penetrates, it goes through trees. By what? It eats at the tree. It eats at the bark. Now, if I try to poke a hole in the bark in a strong tree, I can't do it. If I have a right instrument, I can carve into it. But if I don't have the right instrument, I need a strong metal. And this little nothing, you can smush it, and yet it has so much power in its mouth. So you see the power of the tolas, the power of the mouth, which represents speech. The main element of the human is the power of speech. And as we discussed, and I'm not going to go through it again, why the real power of the human being, which is the power of keser, of the crown, is represented in the mouth. So the tolas represents the medaber, and you take all this and create a concoction where all of them get burnt up in the fire and are rising up above. That is the ultimate ratzo, and what that elicits is a powerful descent of godly light downward into the world, which is the idea of taking the mayim chayim, the spring water, and pouring it and mixing it together with the ash. This is this two forces of elevation and descent, which is the collective idea of all the mitzvahs. Okay. And last week, this was what we learned. That's the earlier part of the Maimer. And then we added to that, and again, the latter part of last week's Thursday night class was to get more specific in this idea of the burning of the red heifer, of the paraduma. So he discussed that the idea of the paraduma is to extract the sparks of holiness that are, when we say elevation, we mean elevation of the world, but more particular, why dafka a red heifer? This would be any animal. Based on what we said before, that you want to elevate every element of creation, any animal would be good. And why dafka the red heifer, and why was it done outside of the camp? Outside of the holiness. It was done outdoors. So he explains, because when we say what particular gives God satisfaction, when we are taking something of the world and bringing it close to Him, bringing it, reunifying with Him, which is the idea of returning energy, restoring energy to its original state, is primarily when we take the energy of things that have become totally disconnected. And that is the unholy, the realm of the klipa, the unholy. When we can, and if you think about it, paraduma also comes to heal the death, the contamination that comes as a result of death. And the contamination that comes as a result of death comes from a state of disconnect. What does death mean? God is life, disconnect from God. And so the idea of it is there are living entities in this world. There are forces in this world that even though they're powerful and they're strong, they're essentially dead. The reason why they're dead is because they live in a state of disconnect from God. So even though temporarily they have energy, but obviously they don't unify with that energy, they don't connect with that energy, and therefore their energy and them are completely separated, and therefore they're living a mirage existence. They're not real, it's a fake, it's not a true, when I say true, I mean it can live for hundreds and even thousands of years, but it has no true beingness, true life. Real life is eternal life, and the world is going to be alive eternally, and that's when we connect every aspect of the world to its living source, and that is God, who is forever, and therefore everything living off Him and attached to its life lives forever. So the reason there is death in the world is because there are forces in this world that distribute death. How do they distribute death? They distribute their consciousness, which is a consciousness which is separated from God, which is the consciousness of klipa. Okay? So now, anything that comes into everything that absorbs from the klipa consciousness, from the klipa knowledge, which is like the tree of knowledge of good and bad, anything that from the snake's knowledge, and it inserts that venom into something, so even though that thing can live, but it's not really alive, it's disconnected. So how do we rectify that state of disconnect? Is by taking the energy out, the temporary energy that's there, stuck, and enlivening it, by extracting it, and therefore eliminating the distributors, the promoters, the influencers of death in the world, which are the klipa agents, which are very active, and you have to undo them. And when you undo them, klipa cease to exist. So there's nobody marketing a life ignoring God. That's the idea. When there are those who market a life of ignoring God, that means they're really marketing death. Even though externally you don't see it, because superficially they're well and rich and powerful and strong and have huge influence, but really it's death. Because, as we mentioned, so we don't need much explanation. And everything has to always, in order to appreciate, in order to fix something, in order to rectify something, you always have to go deep and get to the core of a problem. We know that in everything. So if your computer is malfunctioning, if your refrigerator is malfunctioning, if anything is malfunctioning. If a person's body is malfunctioning, the reason you go to a physician, the reason you go to a technician, the reason you go to a engineer or whatever it is to take a look and see the root of the problem, which is not always visible on the outside. On the outside, you see symptoms. When you dig deeper beneath the symptoms, you get to the cause of all these symptoms. So what's the cause of all the symptoms? It is rooted in the red heifer. The red heifer is the one that makes, when it's alive, not when it's dead. The red heifer, the para aduma, is what enables klipa to exist. Why? It itself is not a bad being. That's why it's a kosher animal. If it would be really, really non-good, it would be non-kosher. If it would be a full-fledged klipa. It's not a full-fledged klipa, but it is a klipa that all klipas are hinged on. All unholy are latched on to the red heifer to give it life. How does that work? That's the concept that there is something called klipas noga. Klipas noga means the glowing shell. We speak about the forces that cover up and conceal God. They're called shells, and primarily they are described as the three impure shells. Now they themselves, because they're in a state of complete rejection of God, whether they deny God, the spiritual klipos don't deny God. You can't deny God, but they are in a state of total disobedience. They don't want to be connected. They're evil, pure evil. They can't disobey completely. Again, the spiritual klipa can never disobey, because even Bilam, who was a wicked man, could not disobey. We learned last week, he said, I cannot disobey God, so they can't disobey God, but they represent an ideology that completely doesn't want to submit to God. And therefore, there is no way that they can stand and receive, that God would transmit and give them life. God does not give them life directly. He gives them life through a channel, a mediator. Who's the mediator? The mediator is the midsection klipa. The midsection klipa is called klipas noga, which is a mixture of good and bad. So the good side, I'm not going to get into all the understanding of it, but the good side of klipas noga, because it's good, and that means it's submissive to God and it's connected, it's not holy, but it is semi, it's on a level of much higher consciousness, and therefore far more tuned into the purpose of creation. And it is therefore a vehicle and a vessel, rather, to be able to receive divine energy. Once it receives its energy through its higher side, which is good and holy, it then processes that energy into itself, and being that it has a lower side, and the lower side is impure, it takes the impurity, and now it has this energy that is already contaminated and already darker and more disconnected, and now that energy is now conditioned and prepared to be able to be passed on to what is utterly wicked and against God. Without this transformer, without this, what we call it a transformer, without this mediator, so to speak, the unholy would be totally cut off. That's the idea of klipas noga. It's this middle, it's this agent. It's half good, and like we see within ourselves, give a simple example within ourselves, is that our true energy comes from goodness, from holiness. So when we do, when our higher side, our better side, when we wake up and we're in a higher state of consciousness and a higher state of godliness, and we're into doing good things, we learn Torah, we daven well, that's when we're really filling our soul with real powerful energy. But being that we're not yet we're like this klipas noga entities, because we don't always maintain such a high level of sensitivity. When we close the book and we cease to focus in on what's right, what's good, what's holy, what's true, and we begin to see the world as the world markets itself, as Hollywood markets the world, as the world and the other forces that constantly try to give us an image of existence the way they like it, and we buy into it, we accept it, and we fall into such a consciousness, which means less devoted towards our purpose and mission, one that emboldens selfishness or just self-absorption, a life devoid of meaning and higher purpose, but just live life so that you can enjoy, which we all sometimes fall into. That's when we are acting as converters of energy, precisely because we prayed, we davened, we were in a state of deeper connection. we received a tremendous blessing. While we pray, God downloads into us powerful blessings so that we can use that energy to serve our purpose. But then when we enter into this forgetfulness state, we begin to translate, we misuse this energy into, at first, not into bad things, but they're also not focused. And from there, we can, God forbid, begin to even think or entertain the thought of doing things that are utterly against God, using the very blessings that God has given us. In simple language, God give a person a blessing of a lot of tzedakah, of a lot of money. Person makes money. And it could be you made a lot of money because you gave tzedakah. And when you're giving tzedakah, you're plugging into holiness. And when you give tzedakah, God gives you. Every time you give, you download an incredible blessing from God. It could be you got the blessing because in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur you were so doing such well tshuva, and you were so connected, such a deep repentance, and you filled your basket, you filled your reservoir with powerful, God gave you an incredible blessing. But 6 months later, you're not in that holy state. You take that very money itself that God has given the person, and God forbid, one, not you, but whoever it is, one uses it for things that are not kosher and not godly, and as a result of that, one is bestowing this holy energy into the klipa. So that's the idea of klipas noga, which is in the middle. It's not a evil entity, but precisely it's needed to be there in order to pass on energy to the unholy. And this is the idea of the red heifer, is that we're burning this animal. Now, what has to do with the red heifer? Let's understand how the red. So we explain the main source of klipa in general to exist is from the left side. The ox, and in the Merkava, in the chariot, there's a lion on the right side, and there's an ox on the left side. And we discussed in the earlier class that since the right side is much deeper plugged in to the holy, because the right side is chesed, and chesed is revelation. So on the right side, everybody that receives on the right side is less likely to go astray, more connected. And even as the right side continues outward to the very, very, very farthest levels of the cosmos, the most external levels, it still maintains and retains some level of higher consciousness, and therefore it never becomes really klipa. On the left side, there is a much greater, the left side also transmits, but because the energy on the left is more reluctant of flowing outward, because the left side's energy is more of an inward energy. That's what the left is in. The energy is gevura. Gevura wants to withdraw. So when it finally does go out, it only goes out in a very, 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 very minuscule flow. And because it's a very minuscule flow, the recipients over there have far less awareness and consciousness of God, and therefore they can become more farklipet. They become more more disconnected in their consciousness, to the point that you can have real klipos on the left. So the first recipient that's considered a klipa is on the left side, and it's the red heifer. It's the female receiving from the male ox, which is holiness, but the female is already the recipient of it, and it's receiving the red. It's a lot of dinim, judgment, which is the color of red. It is now bad, but it facilitates all evil, because all evil plugs into it. So how do we fix it? Is when we take this middle stage and we empty the energy back to holiness. Once she is elevated to holiness and reabsorbed into Kedusha, there's no outlet for klipa, because klipa, as we said earlier, the real klipas, they can't plug into holiness directly. So how do we do that? So when we slaughter the red heifer, and we take its blood, which blood means its inner energy, its inner vitality, which is really good, because remember we said that the noga, the klipas noga, is good and bad. But we take that good energy, which is good, and separate it from the rest, and sprinkle it towards the Holy of Holies. That means like a person who has a moment of powerful tshuva. His inner identity and inner energy is completely devoted and dedicated towards godliness. So that's the inner energy. But that's not enough. Then we take the outer external part of it, which, as we said before, it's not the primary energy, but it's the leaking, the part of the energy where it starts to leak already into the unholy. And it's not bad yet. Even when it's acting in an unholy way, it's not really bad yet. It's just less godly conscious. It's like we discussed last week, is that in Hasidic teaching, it is taught that the doorway, the entranceway into sinfulness comes from indulgence in the permissible. When we're not mindful in all that we do, and we allow ourselves just to live, even when we're not doing things that are not kosher, we stick only to the kosher, but we allow ourselves complete indulgence in these things without purpose, from that state is when we become thickened, less godly conscious, and that becomes a doorway to, God forbid, fall into not to be able to control ourselves. If, God forbid, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, gets into us, which is, the Yetzer Hara is an entity of the three impure klipas. When that comes into us and makes suggestions of sinfulness, we say, it's not so bad. So if I'm not listening to God for 5 minutes, not so bad. An hour, 2 minutes, not so bad. But why do we even think that way? It's because we've been in this klipas noga state. So the klipas noga, so therefore, it's now, in order to rectify the klipas noga completely, we have to take all those areas where our energy went into, which are not evil, but they're not connected. That's the point. It's not connected. So in that aspect, we have to extract the energy of it. Extract the energy. And that's what happens because, let's put it this way, our passion and our fire and our excitement in all those materialistic pursuits, the passion itself is not bad. The problem is the form that it takes hold. The fact that we want to feel good, that itself is not bad, because you could technically redeem that and make it, I want to feel good fulfilling my purpose and my mission. I want to feel good by finding pleasure in connecting to the divine. The fact that we inserted that energy into feeling good by eating a bag of potato chips, which is not going to do me any good, it's not helping me serve God, it's only, it's only delighting my craving for salt right now and whatever it is and the crunch. So that means that a point of energy, of passion, got trapped in an unholy trapping. Not evil, because it's kosher potato chips, but it's still, from that bag of potato chips, you might find yourself an hour or two later dreaming of some other non-kosher fantasy. And you're not even putting it together that the reason why you're even thinking about this is because of the bag of potato chips. See, that's what I'm saying. That's the idea that the Alter Rebbe is conveying. So now we need to disintegrate. Now here's the thing. The energy in this excitement, you stopped, you parked your car, you went into the gas station, you looked for the kind of chips you like. There's a whole lot of energy there, a whole lot of excitement, because you're like, I must have that right now. Now, truth is, you can buy an apple. That would probably do you better. Or you can even buy almonds, probably would do you better, because it's something healthy, right? And you're picking up the potato chips, which has no nutritional value at all, and you're eating it. Again, I'm not telling anybody whether to eat potato chips or not. I'm giving the idea just so you get what I'm saying. I'm talking my own my own struggles, right? You don't need it, right? So there's a whole lot of energy there. So that energy itself is not bad, because what's bad is that it took a form of the bag, the chips. So now when you can undo the form, which is the chips, and just allow that energy to go out of it, and now you take that craving, you say, I have a craving for a sensation. You know what I'm going to do now with that same sensation? I'm going to eat something healthy, and I'm going to be mindful that I'm going to use this energy that I'm getting now to be more focused on my purpose and my mission. Imagine if we do that when you want the potato chips. So that's when you extracted it. That's called burning the carcass of the red heifer. When you're burning it, you're burning out the water, the fire, and the air that's in it, and you're just getting the earth that's in it. The earth is the essence of it. The essence of that passion is good, and you're redirecting it to its holiness. Or sometimes, a person just needs to feel good for a moment. Here's the thing. Imagine if you decide that, you know what, I have this energy for some kind of material pleasure. I feel I need to feel good right now. And I'm nothing bad, just feel good. Maybe I can listen to something that's going to make me feel good. Something, so you tune your, today we can find podcasts, find your favorite teacher, put it on instead of just indulging, and find the same pleasure in something holy. And yet not always does food have to be replaced with food. It could be, sometimes it's just the sensation of feeling uplifted. And you can get that from something godly. How about saying, I'll find a pleasure in helping someone? That too. There you go. You just move the energy from one form to another form, and you redeem the energy. You redeem the spark. The satisfaction that gives God is infinite. That kind of made the entire creation worthy of being created for that day, just for that one little shift. That means burning the red heifer. Now, by doing that, you're cutting off the klipa in an enormous way, because the only way the klipa can survive, the real dark stuff can survive, is if we keep feeding into these mindless, meaningless, godless pleasures that we look at them and say, it's not bad, it's kosher. Yeah, but they're mindless and godless, so it's really, it's the neighbor of death. And when we minimize, get less and less into those areas and fill those spaces with godly content, the klipa has less where to latch itself onto and to derive energy from. That's what we learned last class. Well, I didn't expect to spend so much time in reviewing, but I think there's a lot of newness in this review. So now, once we have that, we also understand. Then he continued, and he said, by lifting the sparks from this burnt red heifer, by extracting these from the ready animals, see, not the blood. The blood is your inner life force. A Jew, to put it this way, once we take our main energy in life and focus in holiness, that's the blood. But we're not talking about the main. We're talking about the small little expressions, the outer. Your main part of your day, you're focused on what you should be doing in life. But you have these, we all have these secondary tier, the secondary tier of involvement, where it's the in-between. It's the 15 minutes in between the doing acts of holiness. Your shiurim, your davening, you're working for a living. It's the in-between time. It's the leisurely time where there is so much excessive energy that leaks into godless and meaningless and mindless actions and activities that are just, and that's where the leakage is taking place. The more we can close those gaps, that's the idea, that's the burning of the red heifer, and return the energy. It's an act of tshuva, returning it to holiness. That's where it's all at. This is awesome. But after we have this return, we also need to fill our lives with holiness. That's the pouring of the water, is that when we then, after have these returning moments, retracting energy, tshuva moments, moments of ascent, pulling out, we draw godly infusion into the holy vessels, which is Torah study, words of Torah, mainly he said words of Torah. Then we're channeling godliness into vessels, into holy containers. The last thing we learned is that after we complete doing that, you're supposed to have the ash is on top of the water. That means after we experience this intense quest of return to God, and then that's the fire, that's the ash. We pour the waters and we satiate it with a flow of energy downward. The ash has to still be on top of the water. What's the idea of the ash being on top of the water? Is that our sense of fulfillment that comes about by doing godly things should never extinguish and put out completely that yearning of connection, of transcendence. There should always be a balance between the descent and the ascending. And after the descent, we still have to sense a continuous dissatisfaction that even though we're doing everything godly in this world, we recognize that just by being physical and being within this world, we're so limited in our experience of the divine. And therefore, we should always want a return back into transcendence. Okay, that's what we learned. Now, before I start Siv Dalet, Perek Dalet, I'd like to learn, there's a little star over here. I'd like to learn as everybody knows, that the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of the author of the Baal HaTanya, the third Chabad Rebbe, who was the one who had these Maimarim printed, added to the discourse itself his footnotes, or his additions. Most of the times it's inserted in the Maimar itself, but sometimes there are some omissions, and they're printed in the back. So in the back over here, there is a very nice long addition from the Tzemach Tzedek, which I'd like to learn now before we continue. That the water cannot extinguish the fire. Bebuch 1102 Noisef. There's an edition. I guess they had different pamphlets and it had names. This was 1102, the book of the Tzemach Tzedek's comments. Belukutei Torah Chukas non ches daled. Look in Lekutei Torah. No, he brings this mimer, the Inyan Efer al Gabe Mayim Chayim, the idea of the Efer on top of the water, Hainukum Shekasam and Makam Achar, as stated elsewhere, Shebchinas Reusa de Liba B'chol Ma'oitcha, that the yearning of the heart, which is the main idea of the fire, of the ash, which represents this ascendance, returning energy upward, which in general, even though we just discussed how it's, picking up the little pieces of energy that are stuck in the klipa and returning them back to their source. But in general, it means the fire of the Jew, the fire in our soul, in which we yearn for ascendance. We yearn to break free from the constrictions and to reunite with the infinite, right? So that's called Reusa de Liba. It's called the yearning of the heart. B'chol ma'oitcha, with all your might. B'li gavul, it's without an end, it's limitless. Hu b'china shalamayla miTorah. It actually connects us to God higher than Torah. Torah, we're plugging into a very high divine channel, and we're channeling down. It's very high. Torah originates in the highest of the high. But yet, in prayer, when we experience a powerful inner yearning to God, we're touching God in a deeper place than when we're learning Torah, and we're drawing down. When it is an explosive, meaning there's many different types of love, when it is the deepest yearning of the soul, when the soul is really rapturing in its love for God. And where do you find that we reach higher into the divine through this deep, fiery love? We find that the sages say, the early Chasidim, which represents the early pious ones, they spent 9 hours a day praying. Now that's a lot of time. 9 hours, because every prayer was an hour. Then they would meditate an hour before, and then an hour after prayer, they were still, in this impacted by their prayer. So they couldn't do anything else. They went so deep in that they took them time to get out of it another hour. So altogether, 3 prayers a day ended up being 9 hours davening a day. Now, for a Jew who's got time to devote to spirituality, we know that the highest calling is to study Torah. And yet these Hasidim, who could have spent those 9 hours a day in Torah study, chose not to spend those 9 hours. They did study Torah all the rest of the time. But yet, 9 hours they devoted to prayer. Now, most people can devote only 3 hours to prayer, or even less, 2.5 hours. Shachris takes, the Alter Rebbe recommends an hour and a half for Shachris. For the morning prayer, it's longer. But Mincha Ma'ariv, let's say each one, 20 minutes. So an hour and a half plus 20, 40, in 2 hours and 10 minutes, you I've got all your prayers done, even if you daven nice and carefully. They have to do it in 9 hours. Why did they spend it? For that time, there's another, 6 hours and 40 minutes or something like that, which could be spent in Torah study. Instead, they did it, they kept it, they set that time aside for prayer, which obviously it's compromising on the Torah study. And if their objective is to connect to Hashem, so you should use your time correctly. So you see from here, the reason why they had the opportunity to do both and they chose prayer is because prayer is a deeper connection. So the sages say, but what happened with their Torah? So the sages say, because they were Chassid. In other words, usually in order to maintain scholarly knowledge, Torah is so vast, and you have to review and review and review. It takes many hours. Obviously, they didn't have so much time for maybe they had time to learn new things, but didn't have time for the reviewing. So the Gemara says, because they were Hasidim, because they were so pious, they would retain all whatever they studied. So they didn't have to do Chazara, review, and instead they could always learn new things, new Torah, and their old Torah was kept without needing the review. What does that mean? So over there he explains. So he explains that the real meaning of that is that spiritually they're connecting to a much higher place. I'm sure what that means, that their Torah is mishtameres, I should have looked it up, and I didn't look it up to see how he interprets that. If you give me just 1 second. I just want to switch my glasses because I'm reading inside, and it would be easier for me to. And that's why the Efer, the ash, by the way, for those who want to learn this Maimer inside with me, this is on page 302 in the back of Sefer L'Kutei Torah. He has this footnote. And that's why the ash, which represents this racing upward, with all your might, al gabi mayim chayim, is on top of the water, shehu Torah, which is the Torah. And now, on even a more higher level, it's also similar. You see, the idea of ash and water is the ash is gevura, and the water is chesed, is kindness. This is gevura, severity, discipline, and this is kindness. Now, down here, we spoke earlier, kindness is much preferable over gevura. We spoke earlier that kindness is revelation. And gevura comes concealment. So there's and even in the spheros, which one is first? Which one emerges first? First chesed, then gevura. So chesed is higher than gevura. Yet in its source, remember we learned last class that everything is upside down. Just like we said, the 4 elements: fire, wind, water. The 4 types of animals. The lowest, the domim, is in its source higher than the other forms of life. So the same is also between chesed and gevura. In its source, it means in keser, in the crown, before things are projected. But in their source, then gevura is higher. So therefore the ash, which represents the gevura, is higher than the water. Gevura's gevaya machasadim is higher than chesed, kamailas azav ala kesed. Like the quality of gold over silver. Gold and silver are 2 metallics, which the gold is fire. That's why gold has a color of fire, and silver is a color of water. And the same is also above. So therefore, the same is also above. Inyan kiddush mechatas. So what is the idea in this process of taking the waters, adding the ash to the water? And I mentioned this in the last class. It's called sanctifying the sprinkling water. Chatas over here, or purifying water. So the chatas, the mei chatas, is the special red heifer water, and the putting the ash into the water, because the halacha is you're supposed to, even though the verse seems to imply you first put the ash in, and then you put the water. But the halacha is not that way. You're supposed to put the water into a vessel. You're supposed to fill the water. A lot of laws about filling the water. It's called miloi mechatas, filling the water. It's very technical. And then after that's done, you take some of the ashes and you put it on the water. So putting the ashes on the water is called sanctifying the water. So what does that mean spiritually? Mayim is chachma, is wisdom, as we discussed. Mayim, we said, is chesed, but chesed is on the right side, and all the way up on the tippy top of the right side is chachma, because on the right side is chachma is on the right side, bina is on the left side, and chesed is the emotion corresponding to chachma. So that's mayim. Mayim chayim, spring water, means chachma, as chachma is rooted in its source, which is called chachma stima, chachma in keser. Chachma, as it's connected to the living spring waters, chachma is not even chachma. Chachma is still included in keser, which what we called earlier was moach stima, the closed element of moach. It's the pre-intelligence. It's the water on the highest level. Yet, by putting ashes into that water, we're sanctifying it, which means we're making it holy. So what does that mean? That means we're elevating even chachma stima. Why is that? In Yekiddush Mechatos, that means tala de bedulcha. We're connecting the chachma, the moach stima, to the crystal dew, which we had a whole class, and I mentioned this last week. I mentioned that we had a class which spanned I think 4 or 5 classes, called The Secret of the Crystal Dew. So the crystal dew is the idea in the Zohar talks about, that's where Tchias HaMesim comes from. That's where the resurrection of the dead is going to come from. It's from the dew that's coming from the bedulcha. Now bedulcha is a type of stone that has a little red tinge to it. So we discussed that at that shir, this is referring to the level of Atik Yomin in Keter itself, the innermost of the crown, and in it, it's the gevura is the Atik Yomim. It's the intensity of Atik Yom. The gevura, now obviously on levels of Atik, there's no gevura. It represents intense chesed, but intense chesed is called gevura, and that's the redness, is the intensity of it. The ash that goes up to its quintessential source. It goes up to the gevura of Atik Yomim. And that gevura of Atik Yomim, that crystal tal de bedulcha, is much higher than the shorish of chesed, than even moach stima. And when we draw down just a tinge of talad de bedulcha into moach stima, it intensifies the moichin, and it intensifies the entire flow of the right. And that's the meaning of, so in simple words, that means that if we pray with powerful yearning, if we experience a moment of tshuva, the weeping of our soul to reconnect to God, it energizes all the Torah that we study with such an incredible intensity. And it's the potency of whatever we're downloading is incredible in its power. Shehu gevura da'atik. This is, as he said, mechatas tala de bedulcha. We're going up through the ashes, up to the dew of the bedulcha. Shehu gevura da'atik, which is the gevura of Atik Yomin, and Tanya, and he calls it also over there. He calls it the dark candle. What was the word over there that he calls it over there? The dark lamp. And I forgot already. But he doesn't mention Gevura da'atik hamislabeshes b'moach stima, that is enclosed in moach stima. We're activating. Gevura da'atik yomin is enclosed in moach stima, and we're activating that. Ki avoda. And why do we need that particularly now? By the red heifer, because the whole idea of the red heifer is to remove the power of tumah from the world, the powers of unholy. They're the ones who are, as we spoke earlier, they're marketing death, and they need to be. Their energy has to be taken away from them. Ki avoda asruach hatuma, the removal of the spirit of impurity, tzarich liyos, has to be al yadin ayadei bechinas gevura. It needs, in other words, in order to disconnect them, there needs to be a power of gevura. V'loy dai bechesed levad. It's not enough with kindness on its own. So the flow of living waters on its own is a flow, You might say by increasing a flow of godly revelation, the klipa will run away. Not necessarily, quite on the contrary. Once they're in power, even if you're increasing the flow of revelation, they can even grab onto that. You need to give them a zinger. You need to give them something hot, something very intense that makes them run. And for that, you need to plug all the way in to even though we said before, Gevura is actually the reason they exist. That's the lower levels of Gevura, where Gevura is about restraining. But when you go all the way up to the core essence of Gevura, where the Gevura is not about restraining, but about intense giving, it's that intensity that burns the klipa. Which is also known about the 13 strands of the beard. Now we know the 13 strands of the beard represent the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, very, very high, but here that comes from Keter, from the crown. And we see an interesting thing. And it's reflected in the human being, in the beard. That's why the beard is very, very holy. That's why we're supposed to we're not allowed to shave the beard. And according to Kabbalah, we shouldn't even touch the beard, meaning in a sense we shouldn't even trim it or anything like that, because the beard is very, very holy. So it is explained why. Because the hair from the beard is rooted in Keser, in the crown, all the way up, that it receives from Moyach Stima, from the closed moch. And that's why it says that you only get a beard when there's a certain maturity. Okay, there's two levels of moach. There is the revealed moichin, that's your conscious intelligence, and there is the pre-intelligence, the real creative source from where all the source of seichel. Now, when a person, the revealed moichin are active and revealed from when we're young, even a little child, their brain, but the concealed moichin, the inner power of the inner mochen, only reveal itself at a certain age, after 13, and when you become a teenager. And that's why the beard starts growing then, because beard represents a drawing of this moyach stima, which in moyach stima is really connected to gevura da'atik. Why? Let me just say one nakuda. I'll say the reason why. Because moyach stima is the beginning of being able to focus energy. Because the moichen is the first power of lights in vessels, in containers. Intelligence. The energy of the human being is really the soul is a vast energy. Intelligence is ideas set in which you can grasp them. So the energy coming into containers. In order to be able to contain requires a powerful force of gevura, of restriction, of restriction. Now, the power to restrict something takes more strength than the power of diffusion. One thing, the power to contract. So the source of moyach stima is in the gevura element, in the strength of the infinite, in the gevura, the intensity of the infinite. So therefore, the gevura da'atik is what empowers moyach stima. And from there come the strands, the beard. Now you see an interesting thing. If you analyze the hair of the head and the hair of the beard, the consistency is a different kind of a consistency. The hair of the head is it's a soft hair. They're very. The hair of the beard has a certain. It's made up. It's a harder hair. The consistency is harder. Why is that? Everything is reflecting something. Because hardness and toughness represents gevura. Since the hair of the beard is coming from moyach stima, the hair of the head is coming from the revealed mochen, from the revealed chachma. That's why it's around the brain. It's because there's so much energy in the brain, some of that energy kind of like protrudes outward and expresses itself in the hair. The hair of the head, because it's coming from the revealed chachma, it's a chesed energy, so it's soft. The beard of the hair, it's coming from moyach stima, the concealed mochen, which is rooted in gevura da'atik, it's strong. But precisely because of that, it chases the klipa away. It has gevura and it chases the klipa away. Yud Gimel Tkuna Duna Shalachenim Sares Kashin. They are hard lichpais adinim, to subdue the judgments. Masha Enkin Sared, and that's why when there is judgments in the world, we evoke the 13 attributes of mercy, which have an element. There's two things. It's about evoking God's mercy, but it's also about destroying that which is bad in the world, getting rid of the klipas, of the prosecutors, or whatever it is. In order to overcome them, you need something strong, and that's the hair of the beard. Which isn't the case of the hair of the head. Shem she'iyin, I guess that means it's soft. Why are the hairs of the beard harder, firmer? That's because they're drawn from the concealed level of moach, the mochin of that's closed, that's still in keser. Shenis labish bo, which in it is enclosed, the gevura, the atik, the gevura of atik yoimin. And as all of this is written in the idra, in the portion of Zohar called Idra and Pashas Nasai, Daf Kuf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, Biur Arizal Sham, and as the Arizal explains it. So similar to that, just like you have this idea, we'll understand the ash of the Paraduma, which is the ash represents this power of Gevura, but Gevura as it is returning all the way to the beginning of Gevura, which is the Gevura of Atik Yoimin. B'mei Chatas, and the waters of Chatas. Shem Litchais, which also over here, the water, the spring, is to push, to cause the power of Tumah to go away. Why? You have a person who's defiled because he came into contact with death. So death comes from the power of the Chitzonim, of the unholy, of the impure klipas that have now latched itself onto any person who comes into contact with death. So in order to chase them away, to expel them, you need something very powerful. So we have to get the gevura, the atik, into the water. The water has to be potent. So therefore, tzarech liyasayde gevura hanal, you need to elicit the power of gevura. Hamelu beshes, which is enclosed, b'moyach stima, in the closed moichin. Shemesham, that from there, ikar hakpa'as hadinim, is the main power to subdue the judgments. V'hainu efer al gabe mayim. That's why the ash floats on top of the water. Because this gevura, hu the atik, this gevura is from atik, from such a high level. Atik means the ancient of days, the innermost of the crown. That's higher than the spring water. The spring water themselves called, again, regular water represents chachma. Spring water represents chachma as it is in its source. Moach stima, the erech anpin, which is the closed moach of what's called the external part of keser, which is called erech anpin, which is where the source of chachma is. But in that we draw down, we reveal the gevura, the atik that's in it. Raksha mislabish, but in it is mislabish gevura, the atik, and therefore you draw that and you uncover that. Inyan even habdoilach. This is the idea of, as we spoke, or I mentioned earlier, of the bedolach stone, of the crystal stone, shulavan, it's white stone. The gavna sumka is chazebe, but there is a certain red tinge in it. Hagavura the atik, that's the gavura of atik yoimin. As stated elsewhere. The tzarech iyani, the Tzemach Tzedek says, we need to understand the Pirush Idra Marizal Daf Kuf Chaf Ches. The Arizal, when the Arizal explains the redness of the Gavna de Bedulcha, of Avna de Bedulcha, of the Bedulcha stone, the Arizal seems to be troubled. What's there troubling the Arizal? If it's Bedulcha, if it's the stone Bedulcha, which is called the crystals Gentala de Bedulcha, which is so high, it's coming from Atik Yomen, which Atik is pure Chesed. It says with the less smaller Bahi Atika, there's no left over there. It's so purely kind, there's infinite goodness. So how do you get redness? Where's the Gevura coming from? So the Arizal says that when it says it's red, it's chazebe, it's revealed in it, when it reveals itself in the Ze'er Anpin, and in the Ze'er Anpin there is already the Ze'er Anpin, which is much lower, that's already the emotions as they are in Atzilus, Over there is already chesed and gevura. So when it reveals itself over there, the redness comes from its revelation of Zeir, in Zeir Anpin, when there is gevura. But Tzemach Tzedek is asking, he says, v'tzarech iyon. The reason it's red is because it is even in Atik Yoimin, it's coming from Gevura the Atik, and that's its redness. He just asked Tzorech. Okay. V'hinei b'kriya shema ksiv. Now, b'kriya shema it says, v'hoyu hadvarim ha'ele al levavcha. Al levavecha. In Kriya Shema, you have the two modes of Ratzai, of racing energy, Gevura energy going back to its source, and descending energy, flow. Why? Because V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, you should love God, your God, with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might, especially when you get to all your might, represents this boundless yearning for God. And then we learned that what happens after that, you shouldn't stop with this spiritual quest. Immediately you should channel that energy into Torah, into Torah and good deeds. It should be these words, which is the words of Torah, that should be your response to this thirst. Don't leave it in an open-ended yearning. You should have also a downloading of godly light. But the interesting thing is, it's that these words should be upon your heart, which would imply the opposite, that the water is on top of the ashes. We're learning now that the ashes is on top of the water, reflecting that that the ash, the ratzai, floats on top of the water, on top of the shuv. Here we seem to be saying the opposite, and so comes out according to that the Torah, which is shuv, who al b'chinas ratzai, is on the ratzai, on top of it. And elsewhere we find that we also state the same idea. On Shavuos, when they brought the special korban of the two breads, they would wave two sheep, and in addition to the two sheep, they also brought two breads. So it's explained over there that the sheep represent the animal, which the animal is made up mainly of gevura, of blood, especially when you're bringing it as a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash. So it's an ascending energy. The two bread, which represent the Torah, because the Torah is made out and was made out of wheat, and in Hebrew the word chita, the wheat is chita, and chita is ches tes hey, which is gematria. The numeric value is 22, which 22 is the 22 letters of the Torah, so it represents the Torah. And we say that the Torah goes on top of the sheep when they waved it, which again implies that the Torah, which is descending energy, is on top of prayer, which is ascending energy. The two breads, which one of them represents the written Torah, and the other one represents the oral Torah. Hem lamaylam b'chinas kavasim is higher than the prayer, which is the kavasim, the sheep. Zeu lefi sheb'chinas kavasim u'chagat ha'arach. So this is the famous definition answer that Chassidus always says, and I'm going to say it in Yiddish. Chassidus always uses the term "ezventzach v'meret," which in English means it depends on which level we're talking about. Everything is multi-layered. So on certain dimensions, the descent is higher than the ascent. For example, we said earlier, which one is higher, the right side or the left side? So on a more manifest, revealed level, the right side is higher than the left side. I just saw yesterday the Rebbe, someone came to the Rebbe for a blessing for Parnasa, and the Rebbe said that you're closing your jacket in the wrong way. You see, modern suits, modern clothing is made that when you close it, you button it, the button is put, see my buttons fell off, okay, see I need new buttons here. All right, so when your button is here, take the jacket, you close it like this, the button is on the right side, and the hole is on the left side, and the left is on top of the right. Hasidic garments, a kapata, things like that, are made in a way where they are purposely made the right side go over the left. And the reason is because you want to strengthen the right over the left. So the Rebbe told him, your jacket is buttoned the wrong way. Fix your jacket. So it's hard today because If you're wearing real Hasidic garments like the Yidden in, Williamsburg, Borough Park, who a lot, get their suits also in a more Hasidic, they wear more Hasidic type of garment, even shirts. This one is a modern one, also the left and not the right. But I sometimes go to Borough Park, and I go with my father, and we buy shirts. And I love that Hasidic store because they're nice shirts, but they're made to fit that the right side goes on the left, which is a very big bracha. So the Rebbe told them you should wear the shirt the right way. So I'm saying, so people buy the garments, you can buy them, and they're that way. If you buy suits in any modern clothing store, right? So you're going, I don't know, wherever store, wherever you shop, and you buy your suit, the suits are all made that way, that the left will go on the right. So there are people who actually, but I guess not every suit you can change if it's already tailored that way. They try to or when they close it, they close the button in a way where they're overlapping it and push the button in the other way. Whatever, there's a way of doing it. So you see that right is higher than left. But that's only, as we said before, in a more manifest level. In its quintessential source, the left is higher than the right. So the same is what the Tzemach Tzedek is answering over here. Is that when we're talking about the sheep and the bread, since this is representing a certain level, where on that level, the bread is higher than the sheep. The bread, which is chesed, is higher than the sheep, which is gevur. But if on a higher level, which is paraduma, which is very, 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 we're getting into the very, very root, where we're going much deeper, over there you have to do it the other way. So that's where he's saying over here is that kvasim is chagas, is chesed, gevurah, teferes. Keves has 3 letters to it. Chof, shin, beis, which represent chesed, gevurah, and teferes. Is chagas the arich. It's the chesed, gevurah, teferes of the level of arich yoimin. Over there, the bread, which he doesn't say what the bread represents, is higher than it. Ma'ashe enkein hacha, which isn't the case over here. Efer agabe mayim chayim, because it's on a much higher level. Zelefisha efer zeh achar habir. This afer, this ash, is after the rectification. Because remember, we're taking something from the depth, from the bowels of Klippa, and we're returning it back to the source. And when it's returning back to its source, it has such potency, such energy, it lodges itself all the way up to its very, very, very beginning of beginning. And it's raising up to its source. So Roimez Lubchenes Gevura the Atik is remez to the Gevura level of Atik Yoim Keniskliel. The Allah Asman, the Afer Zed, this Allah Asman, this raising of feminine waters, Zeu Bchenes Tshuva. This is not regular Gevura. In a person's regular avoda, where you have gevura, which represents discipline, and chesed, which represents kindness, the kindness has to overpower the gevura. But this is a gevura of tshuva, which tshuva is super potent. Where? Because kiniskali el shaharan hepachlatov, you're taking something that was already bad, and you peeled away all the external husk and skin and everything, and you're just exposing its root essence, energy. And that means you're taking something that was till now stuck and was part of the world of Klippa, and you're restoring it back to holiness. That is known to tshuva einai alavedis. And tshuva is, now, even though we explained earlier that the ash of the paraduma is not coming from sinfulness, it's talking about permissible taiva that you're converting. So he says, yeah. So how come is that called tshuva? Because we learned that it's explained elsewhere that tshuva is not only on sins. Tshuva can mean from just being in a less godly state, you feel the distance and you're returning. And that's what the burning of the ash of the paraduma, so a person realizes that I'm in such a godly, even I'm not sinning, but I'm in such a godless state. Kiyam ala pirud, the fact that one has been separated, shenifrad melukus, one is in a state of separation. The place where the Baal Tshuva stands, even the perfect tzaddikim can't stand. That means the soul is propelled instantly to such unimaginable heights as it soars upward. That's why this reaches so high, all the way into the innermost of the crowd. It is explained in the famous mimer. It's the first mimer in Torah Or. in the entire book that we're learning now, which has 2 volumes, Torah Or and Lakuti Torah, the first mimer in Parshas Bereshis, Kasher Hashamayim HaChadashim, he's talking about the new heavens and the new earth that God is going to create, where over there he explains that Shamayim and Aretz are Ratzai v'Shuv. Shamayim is Shuv, it's the descending light, and Aretz is the yearning light, earth, yearning upward. So over there, but it says there is the earth and the heaven of today, and there's the new heaven and the new earth that Hashem is going to reveal when Mashiach comes. So he explains these are 2 levels in Ratzai v'Shuv. There is one level of Ratzai v'Shuv, today's Ratzai v'Shuv, and there's the future Ratzai v'Shuv, which over there he gives it 2 names. One is called Ratzai v'Shuv, and the other one is called Mati v'Loi Mati, arriving and not arriving. So over there he explains that even though in our current system of Ratzai v'Shuv, the Shuv, the descending energy, is higher than the Ratzai, which would mean that Torah is higher than prayer. But in a much deeper range, which is called Mati v'Loi Mati, where over there the Mati is what? Shuv. Mati means arriving. Energy is arriving outward. Mati means arriving. Loi Mati means not arriving. The energy is turning back into itself, which is the idea of Gevura. So over there it explains that in the system of Mati v'Loi Mati, which is a much deeper state of energy, the Loi Mati is higher than the Mati. In the state of Ratzai v'Shuv, the Shuv, which is the outward flow, is higher, is taking from a higher place than the returning energy. But on a level of tshuva, which ascends, which breaks out of the normative Ratzai v'Shuv, and it's reaching into the levels of Mati v'Loi Mati, over there the Loi Mati is higher than the Mati. That's what he says. The Bebchinas Ratzai v'Shuv and Ratzai v'Shuv Hashuv Gavoya Ma'aratzai. The Shuv is higher than the Ratzai. Like we say in Kriya Shema, the V'hoyu Advarim Me'eleh, that these words of Torah should be alav on your heart. Because what heart are we talking about? The heart of daily prayer, which isn't necessarily a Baal Tshuva. It's not Yom Kippur davening. It's daily prayer. It's an excitement, and then the return of godly flow into the world is greater than the excitement that you have towards God. That's why the words is alav avecha, on top of your heart. Or the 2 breads are on top of the 2 kivas. But when we're talking about tshuva, when you're taking something from the dark side and you're returning it, that's already touching on the levels of Mati v'Loi Mati, getting into Atik, where over there's no Ratzai v'Shuv, just over there the Loi Mati is deeper. Another explanation we could give on this, based on what it says in a different place in Parshas Vayishlach. On the pasuk Vaya Avik Ish Imo, he's going to give now another insight in this idea of the ashes on top of the water. It says in the famous Maimer, which one of my favorite Maimarim, which discusses Yaakov's fighting with the angel of Esau. So it says, Vaya'avik ish imoy, that a man wrestled with him. So it says over there, Shehelu avak beragleim. What's the word Vaya'avik? So Rashi says when 2 people wrestling, they hug each other, they encircle each other. Vaya'avik is an entanglement, being entangled one with each other. But then Rashi brings, I think Rashi himself, the Medrash definitely says it, but I think even Rashi says it, that Vaya'avik is also from the word dust. That means while they were struggling with each other, they were also, another thing that was happening was that they were kicking up dust. And their dust, there was a dust storm, it was a dust cloud. And this dust cloud that was coming up from Yaakov and the angel that they were fighting was going up all the way up, and it went all the way up to the Kisei HaKavod. Now we know there's something else that goes all the way up to the throne of glory, and that's tshuva. Tshuva goes all the way up to the throne of glory. So this dust has something to do with tshuva. So in that mimer, the Alter Rebbe explains something awesome, which we're going to see, I think, is the secret of everything that's happening in the world right now. It's amazing. And that is that the Alter Rebbe explains over there that between the battle of holy and the unholy, which happens on the cosmic level, but also takes place on the private level in each and every one of us, is when the unholy, there he explains this whole idea that we learned over here at great length, that the unholy needs energy from Kedusha. And because it needs energy, it wants to get us to sin. That means it wrangles, it fights with the man of holiness. Our animal soul, our left side, our Yetzer Hara, comes and attacks our Yetzer Tov, and it tries to siphon energy, tries to draw us into the Klippa. So over there he explains how the fight, it's interesting, happens on many levels. He says, one thing we don't find that Yaakov and Esav were doing is they were bowing their heads against each other. Yaakov and the angel of Esav. It doesn't say they were bowing their heads. Because he says that in our intelligence, in our mind, if you have a holy mind, a godly mind, a Torah mind, it's very hard for the klipa to get into the mind and to siphon energy from your mind. Because in the mind, there's a lot of clarity. In other words, as we find by most of us, we know what's right. We know what's good. There's no mess up in the mind. The problem is when you get to the emotions. The heart is not always in the same boat as the mind. It's not always in the same wavelength. The mind would love to live life in a certain way, but the heart, the emotions get entangled in the unholy stuff. We get angry, we get upset, we bear resentment, we experience lusts and desires that are not kosher. So this is all, that's where the klipa fights in the heart. And there the Alter Rebbe explains that mainly in the main three emotions, chesed, gevurah, and that's the meaning of their wrestling. But we see when they wrestled, when the Vayavik, which Vayavik means wrestled, he couldn't harm him on the emotions. Esav didn't harm him. Where did he harm him? He harmed him on his thigh. He hit him in the thigh, and that's where he injured him. So the Alter Rebbe goes through a long explanation over there, which I'm not going to do right now, is that there are 6 emotions, 3 upper emotions and 3 lower emotions. The 3 upper emotions represent the upper part of the person, chesed, gevurah, tiferes. That part of our inner holy psyche, godly soul, it's easier to keep that also in a holy place, not leaking into the klipa. But once you get down to netzach, hod yesod, the lower emotions, over there the leakage is much more likely rather. It's far more likely to leak on that level. And that's why the klipa hits him in the netzach. We taught this mimer, plus I gave Monday night classes on this. It's called The Cosmic Battle. It's one of my favorite classes. I gave it years ago, like probably 10 years ago. You can listen to it. It's on Parshas Vayishlach. Look up on the website, The Cosmic Battle. 2 classes, part 1 and part 2. But after the fight happens on the level of Netzach, there's the final battle. And that's the battle of Malhus. The battle of Malhus is dust. That's the bottom of the feet, where the Malhus is clashing. The Malhus of Klippa fights the Malhus of Kedusha. They go feet to feet. And that's the dust. That's what he explains over there. Now, what I loved about that class was that I explained how you can see this war between holy and the unholy expressing itself throughout all of history. In other words, where is the main battle? In the earlier days, in the days of the Greeks, there was a battle of the heads. There were great philosophy was battling. The ideals of Torah and the ideals of Greek philosophy were fighting with each other. Later, it became the fight on the emotions, on a deep emotion. And our service of God, on the one hand, was deep emotional service on a very, very deep level, but the klipa was also challenging us on the level of emotions. Like you have, Jews that were tempted by the deep, rich, emotional writings of music, writing, stuff like that was trying to capture and draw the Jewish people away from Judaism. There were people that were caught up. So if you look at old stories, it's very rich with deep. But as you get in today's fight, the last generation, it's not about the emotions, it's all superficial, it's all just the act. Everything is about expression. The unholy just wants to express itself. It has nothing to offer anymore but expression. Everything is about parades. You got the pride parade and this parade, and everything is to put it in your face. Everything is action. Everything is out. Everything has to be spoken. Everything has to be put out. And the main avoda in Judaism is also action. The Rebbe focused us all on action. The main thing is to do an act of holiness, express holiness, speak holiness, act holy, do a holiness, express holiness in the world, make a holy sign, make a holy building, make a holy parade. Everything needs onto the streets. Everything has to come out because the Malchus of the Malchus, the 2 Malchus, in other words, the final expression is now. The battle is about the expression. Who's going to express itself? Now, over there he explains the idea of dust. That once the battle goes down to the level of dust, the klipa, it's in holiness, it's called earth. What's the difference between earth and dust is that earth has moisture in it, and therefore you can plant and it can grow. Dust is hollow, it's dead, it doesn't have anything to grow. So the level of Malhus, I know I'm saying a lot over here, but I'm concentrating. If you want to get a full, deep understanding of what I'm saying, please listen to those classes. Because he makes reference to this, but I want to get to one point which I feel is like amazing that's happening in the world right now. I'm just leading up to it. So I'm going through this very bekitzer, I'm very brief. But in the unholy, earth is called dust. Because in the unholy Malchut, there's no life. It presents itself like an imitation of holiness. So it's earth, but there's nothing there. That's why we know, for instance, a person can get caught up in the emotions of a sin. But the act of the sin is ultimately what drags, it's the ultimate finale. You want to get to the final action. But when you get to the final action, it's like, oh man, it's like empty. Oh, there's nothing there. It like suddenly it hits you like, oh, for this? Is this all that it's about? You'd think it would leave you with a deep satisfaction, with a happiness. You'd be happy for at least a week afterwards. Empty nothingness. Today's days, we're constantly being tempted by just pure expression of klipa. I'll give you just a simple example. 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, a yeshiva boy's got to learn Torah. He might be caught up in reading a romantic novel instead of reading Torah, but he's reading a romantic novel. He's reading the romance. He's reading the love. He's reading the experience. There is something schlepping him in a deep way. What's today? Pornography. What's pornography? There's nothing there but the act of sin. And it's not, even though, God forbid, someone can get caught in it, and very hard to get out when someone is addicted, but there's nothing there. They feel sick, they feel empty. It just gets into a habit. There's nothing there. It's just plain the expression, the explain external revelation of all garbage. But that's where it's at now. That's where young people are struggling. That's where the fight is. But here's the thing. What happens when you inhale dust? What happens when you inhale dust? People are allergic to dust. It gives you immediately an allergic reaction. So ultimately, it's when we experience the dust of Klippa, which is the last battle before Mashiach comes. All these people that are struggling in it, what happens? It causes an allergic reaction, and it brings to tshuva. Because in the higher levels of Klippa, you can still convince yourself that there is some content there, there's some fulfillment there, there's some life over there. If you're stuck in the ideological experiences of Klippa, in its emotional elements, they have something to offer. But when it comes to the action, see, an act of a mitzvah is full of life, even though it's only an action. It makes you rich. It gives you a sense of truth and of belonging and of reality that lasts, because it's this. Even though it's an act, and tomorrow you have to do another act, but there is something true life over there, true emes to it. This is nothing. And the opposite, it leads to the tshuva. And that's the idea that Yaakov and Esav in that last battle, the dust itself, which is the tshuva that comes from inhaling the dust, rises all the way up to the Kisei HaKavod and elicits Mashiach. That's basically what the Alter Rebbe explains in that mimer. It's the final battle. So I'm thinking, and he says that that's the idea of the ash of the red heifer. The ash of the red heifer represents the final tshuva. So in a sense, the red heifer ash represents the last generation. And the tshuva that comes from the dust, because ash is also like soot, just ash. There's no life to it anymore. But that itself, when that brings about tshuva, where does it go up to the kisei kavod, to the highest of the high? I'm just thinking, you think about it. What's the pandemic? What's the world under right before Mashiach comes? This pandemic of COVID-19. which is like a dust. Now, it's not necessarily a dust particle, but what is it? It's the last manifestation of klipa. It's the klipa, and it's like a dust that's impacting the entire world. It's the dust of the klipa. It's the avak that's around it. And it's the Malhus of klipa. That's why it's called 19, because Malhus is called 19, because Chava, who's the first human being, first woman, represents Malhus, is gematria 19. Malhus is 19. It's called COVID, because Malhus is called Kvoid Malchuscha Yoimeru, Kvoid, Kavod. Malchus is recorded. COVID-19. It's the COVID of klipa. And that's why they don't want it to go away. And they want to keep the masks on. They're holding on to this COVID-19. But it's the last manifestation of klipa across the entire world. And what's the newest strain that's now worrying the whole world? The Delta strain. What's Delta in Hebrew? What's the word Delta? Dalis. Malchus is called Dal, poor. Malchus is called, and the female Dal, Deles. Aramim Hashem, David the Melech says, Kidili Sani, you lifted me up. Malchus is called the door. Deles. Delta could be Malchus. It's literally the Malchus of Klippa. And that's Dal, it's poor. It's real poor. Empty, nothing to it. And that's its final. And then what's the Klippa in today's world? Everything expression. Everything is expression of unholiness. It's not enough when people have certain things in their life that are not good and not holy. They want to express it that everybody has to see it. And it has to be in your face. It's nothing. There's nothing there. It's substanceless. That's the avak. To us, it means the power of tshuva that we have as a result of this. And that's the Efer of Paraduma. That's what I'm thinking this year is Tavshin Pei Aleph Tiyash Nas Paraduma. The tshuva on this, as a result of COVID-19. It has to lead to tshuva. Because once it's bankrupt, once it's empty, once it's meaningless, once it's lifeless, the Tzemach Tzedek is bringing it here to the idea that this lowest substance, when it's elevated, goes to the highest of the high, the avak, as he says. V'nizbar, as he says, what's the difference? The avak de shtar menura. The Zohar says avak is when a fire burns something, it burns it down to dust. So you see Efer of the Paraduma. V'haina Efer, that's the Efer. V'nizbar sham the pidish helu avak, that they lifted avak. Haina inyan atshuva. It's the idea of tshuva, taking the Yetzer Hara, converting it to holiness. Which is the avak, shehi malchus the klipa, which is the malchus the klipa, mizbarer, and even from there the chayas comes out of it. V'oilat kisei hakavod, that goes up to the kisei hakavod. Denoiga al yedei tshuva, through tshuva. It's interesting. It says kisei hakavod denoiga. I'm not exactly sure what that means. V'hu kamoi b'chenas avak. This is the idea that avak, that even the avak, the malchus, the klipa, is nichlal b'kedusha. The energy of it is nichlal, is included in holiness. B'chenas afar, it goes from the afer into the afar of kedusha. And it's interesting. Kisei hakavod, and that's why it's called COVID. It goes up to the kavod. It goes in, the afer goes into the afar. That's why it's on top of the water. Just like the mayim. Now think about it. Why is it going on top of the mayim chayim? Where is the mayim chayim coming from? Water, spring water. Very, very, but it comes from the earth. So the earth represents the highest of the high, from where the mayim chayim comes from. The afer, which is taking the lowest, goes back up all the way into the afar, which is the source of the mayim chayim. On the end, the final attack of the klipa, of this avak attack, and especially if it was manufactured in a lab, which is a clear indication of a klipa released entity over the entire world. This is this last dust. Like domim is higher mebchenas chay. L'chen hamayim chayim, which is called chay, Nimshachem ha'afar comes from the earth, daika. V'roim is lamaila, and above this earth is indicating l'b'chinas stima, the whole steam and concealed of all concealments. Ki imcha makor chayim, with you is the source of life. It's above chay, even above life. Asher meb'chinas zu v'achachma me'ayin timatze. From this is where chachma, even the closed chachma, comes from. Okay, so all we got to learn today was this one parenthesis of the Tzemach Tzedek. Wow. Now I plan on learning the whole next piece. So I guess that's going to be the project, probably, unless I do it tomorrow morning. I'm not sure I will be able to do it. We're going to have to do this as the Thursday night class this week, and that is to continue and complete this awesome mimer. Meanwhile, everybody be well. Have a good day. And only the best. We should have Mashiach today.